Hi, everybody. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole Beurkens, and today I'm really excited to have as my guest Judy Converse. Judy is a pediatric nutritionist, and she and I have been colleagues for many years, and I greatly admire the pioneering work that she has done in the realm of nutrition and child health and development and mental health. And she really is one of the people who first got me interested in looking at the connection between nutrition and physical health and the kinds of neurodevelopmental and mental health issues that I was seeing in my patients and in my own personal kids. So it's really a delight for me to have her on the show today. Judy is a licensed registered dietitian nutritionist with graduate and undergraduate degrees in nutrition. She has a private practice called Nutrition Care for Children that she established in 1999. She has 3 published print books, and I will say I recommend those books very widely, so definitely check those out. 2 ebooks, numerous articles on nutrition support for children with conditions like autism, ADHD, allergies, FPIES, growth, feeding issues, behavior and conduct disorders, constipation, and more. Judy works with children of all ages, in person or remotely, to customize nutrition strategies so that they can learn, grow, and thrive, and she has expertise in a wide variety of specialized dietary interventions like GAPS, gluten-free, casein-free, ketogenic diets, and more. Judy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you.
So I'd love for us to start out by just having you share a little bit about how you got into doing the kind of work that you're doing with kids and with families.
Sure. Well, kind of it happened to me, basically. You know, I was a mom, became a mom, and had a circumstance with my son that was just really, really stressful, frightening, and we were not helped. We were talking to top people in the country at our major medical center, and it started right from the get-go and near birth. There are lots of feeding issues. He had a condition which wasn't at that time recognized. It's called FPIES, which is food protein induced enterocolitis syndrome. And at the time, that was not even a diagnosis. And we were simply told that it wasn't happening, or I was too nervous. We had no help. And that's really what turned me around. I was already a dietitian. I'd already done work in different settings. I had never planned to work exclusively with kids. But at that time, I was thinking, oh, wow, this can't be true, that I'm the only mom seeing this happen, and this is the only baby. And so he's almost 22 now, so that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And, you know, there wasn't really an internet or anything like that. So it was really just digging back into my training, which was very deep in maternal and child health, infant health, and charting a course for him. And from there, that's where this really grew. It was kind of an organic process.
Yeah, and it's awesome in finding solutions for him and for your family. You then were able to extend that to helping so many other people. And unfortunately, I know that you've seen, as well as what I've seen over the last 20 years, the number of kids with these kinds of issues has just grown astronomically. So there's so many more families that need, you know, this kind of support. So
Right.
there's a lot of different directions that we could take our conversation today, because there's certainly so many things that you have great expertise about. But specifically, we want to focus on the connection between behavioral issues, conduct disorders, those kinds of things, and nutrition, because these really are areas that people are not talking about, and that a lot of parents and professionals, for that matter, don't understand the connection between nutrition and the kinds of behaviors and conduct-related things that their kids are experiencing. So, you know, kids on the autism spectrum, kids with ADHD, sensory processing issues, those types of kids all have a lot of different types of behavior challenges, and often end up just by default on medication, right? I mean, parents go in, my kid's having these issues, you've experienced this personally, as have I, like, oh, well, here's your prescription, right? After a very brief office visit, well, here's your prescription for Ritalin, for, Strattera, for Prozac, for, something even more, powerful. So what I'd like to spend some time talking about is, with these kinds of kids, what have you seen as far as nutrition support, and what do you see as far as the possibilities for these kids without medication? What role can nutrition support play in that?
Right. Well, I've seen kids make complete turnarounds with nutrition support. And I have to be super careful. As a nutritionist dietitian, I'm not allowed to say I treat anything
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not a doctor, and I don't. I don't claim to treat anything. All I'm doing is providing nutrition supports. And the dilemma is those are generally overlooked in medicine, in pediatrics. Those aren't engaged. And it's not because there isn't an evidence base out there that supports it. And it's not because it's too feeble a modality. None of that is true. The issue really is it's about, I would say, the economics of delivering nutrition care. It's time consuming. There's not patented procedures or products or devices or drugs. There's no profit in it.
Mm-hmm.
And the other dilemma is that most physicians don't receive training in this. So they aren't going to be the ones to tell you anything about this. And what I usually see is when I get an opportunity to work with a family, I find multiple nutrition deficits for these kids, and they can be growing fine. They can look okay on a growth chart. This may be completely under the radar, but unless you do some deeper looking and assessing at what's actually reaching that child's brain, then you aren't going to find a problem. So I do that. I investigate, and I do each child as an individual case. And I find a number of issues. And typically when those are supported or corrected, we have a different child, and they're able to calm down, behave, focus, eat, poop, do whatever. Gosh, there's so many possibilities to look at. I mean, you have to remember, as far as nutrients that we know about in kind of a conservative context that we are, quote, essential, there's still dozens of them. Mm-hmm. And then there's a whole world of other substances that are natural, phytonutrients and herbs and all kinds of things that have also a role in supporting these kids. So it's a big toolkit. And once you apply it, really, I've seen very miraculous things happen even after 20 years. There's times where I go, wow, really?
Yeah.
Geez, that's great. It really worked.
I love it.
That's the best part.
Yeah. And I appreciate, what you said a moment ago about, this idea that, well, maybe nutrition is, not a strong enough intervention. You said we've got this huge toolbox, and often people discount that, right? And go, oh, well, what can nutrition really do? Like, my kid's got these serious problems. My kid has, these serious behaviors, or kids even who have been hospitalized for, right, mental health issues, for behavior challenges, those kinds of things. I think often the idea that nutrition could be a pivotal part of addressing what's going on, for that child, I think that really gets overlooked, and people just think, oh, that's kind of, that maybe that's something as an extra, but that's not a core part of what we're doing here. And I know you
right,
believe, as I do, that this really is the core of what we're doing. And so can you talk a little bit about that, this idea that, well, nutrition really isn't a strong enough thing to be worried about doing?
Yeah, so that it's the other way around. You are absolutely right. Nutrition is the core, the strongest part. The only reason why your child is visible in front of you is because they ate food and turned it into their body. I mean, that's what they're made of. And that sounds quaint and all, but it's true. And yeah, absolutely, that it's essential. Typically, I will often hear parents come in and they say, well, we thought we'd try the drug first. Well, of course, it's easy. And it's a wonderful fairy tale. And maybe that's unfair, but to think that you can just take one little pill and all these problems will go away. And I know that there are kids for whom medications have really done some great things, and that's great. That there are also many, many families for whom it's not a great bargain. There's side effects, there's other problems, there's an escalation. We end up on polypharmacy, multiple drugs. But right, I mean, fundamentally, your child's body is built to function and feel good and thrive. And if that is not happening, there's a reason. I will say also, in all my years, I've very rarely, if ever, encountered a case where, parents will come in and say, well, we're told it's just a behavior that my child is doing. I usually find that children want to be happy. They want to be well. They want to be loved. They want to be accepted. They don't want to do things just to make you miserable or to make themselves miserable. And although we know how manipulative children can be, I so often find there was an underlying physiological piece that was disrupting behavior that can be repaired. And suddenly this intractable behavior fades away for no reason, because, well, we've repaired what was driving it on the inside of physically for the child.
Yeah, getting really to that root issue. To me, you know, the behavioral things that we see on the outside are just symptoms of the bigger problem. They're not the problem themselves. They're just symptoms of the bigger problem. And we dig down to figure out what is the root level, or are the root level issues here, and we address those, then everything can shift in terms of those behaviors and those symptoms. So I'm curious to have you talk a bit about some of the things that you often see in kids with these kinds of behavioral challenges, these types of symptoms, just to give people an idea, because I think there's a lot of parents listening who really have not received any information about this to know, well, gosh, what would I be looking for in the realm of nutrition, or what are some of the common things that can come up that fall in the realm of nutrition that can impact my child's behavior?
Right. Well, first of all, I really want to emphasize it's really important, in my opinion, not to do a lot of dabbling and tinkering as a parent. I do know that is very frustrating. You really need a thorough professional assessment and kind of, okay, here's the found problems nutritionally, and here's the order in which we can address them. You can't fix them all at once usually. So parents will typically try, oh, I tried fish oil. Oh, I tried gluten-free. And usually they're doing it wrong. They did the wrong dose, the wrong product.
Right.
So all kinds of things go wrong. Don't waste your time. You know, please don't get professional help with this, because it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's complicated. And although it seems simple and nutrition should be free and it's on the internet, it's not really like that.
Right.
So the kinds of things I've seen, I guess, very common deficits relate to, this is also quite an emerging area of research, which is great, finally, is what's going on in a child's intestinal, in their gut, the gut biome. If you've heard about probiotics, or you've heard about gut biome or gut bacteria, and how essential a beneficial cohort, if you will, of microbes are. That's very important for mood and immune function and all kinds of things. We're finally getting some data out, some research on what it really means to harbor a healthy gut biome in your intestine.
Right.
And oh my goodness, you know, what have we done spending the last 3 decades or 4 decades giving kids antibiotics pretty frequently? So that is not benign after all. So that's number one. Usually my first task is assessing that, and there's some very interesting tools now at hand to do that. And redirecting that. Those microbes are going to affect your child's behavior. So that's very interesting. And then also very common is growth patterns. Children are usually not growing as they should. And this, again, is not something your pediatrician is probably going to tell you unless your child has really failed and gotten at the very bottom of the chart. Then they will refer you to a GI doctor, who will probably give you Pediasure, which is... maybe I wasn't supposed to name a product, but that is one of my least favorite products. Right. And I do get pushback for this, but
corn syrup in a can.
Well, if your child's growth impairment is partly due to the fact that maybe they don't tolerate dairy protein, Pediasure is dairy protein. There's also soy protein in there. I can't tell you how many even tube-fed children I've worked with, and I do work with very medically fragile kids also, who are being given a formula to resolve a growth problem that caused their growth problem in the first place anyway. But that's a real common thing, is how are kids tolerating the food they are eating? Is it working for them, or is it sending false neurotransmitters to the brain that are affecting behavior? This can happen. There are lab options to scrutinize all this. Also very common is for me to find that kids are marginal for iron status. Again, not anemic per se, but in this gray zone, this purgatory called pre-anemia, where functioning falters, including specifically the ability to learn math as well, which is interesting. There's data on iron status and math.
Yeah.
And what a lot of people don't also realize is you need iron to make and break down serotonin and dopamine. So this will affect your mood and your focus. So there's like, again, I just hit on 2 things. There's dozens of things that I look at. And usually no one has turned over those stones. And,
right.
Yeah.
So, specific to the idea of the gut microbiome and things like that, let's talk about some of the signs or some of the things that parents might start to connect. So like you mentioned antibiotics. So kids who have been on antibiotics quite a bit, it's like, oh, if my child's having some of these behavioral challenges, some of these things, and maybe they had a history of chronic ear infections or various types of things that they were on antibiotics for, that's sort of a red flag that, oh, maybe that gut microbiome piece needs to be looked at. I know like constipation or intermittent diarrhea constipation is a big one. And parents are often surprised. They come in, to meet with me as a psychologist. And in the course of doing an intake and them doing the paperwork and me interviewing them, I'm asking things about their child's bowel habits and things like that. And they're looking at me like a little bit confused at first, like, why are you asking me about this? And it's like, because your child, their ability to poop regularly or not, it tells us a lot about what's going on there. So what are some of those common, more physiological symptoms that can indicate that maybe there is a role for nutrition there, or something that needs to be uncovered that parents should look into more?
Well, if you just broadly, if you've been given a kind of sideways glance from your school staff that maybe your child needs medication, which they're not legally supposed to say.
Right.
But I've met many parents who have been told that, and they don't know that that's not cool for a teacher to tell you to go get your child medicated. Then right away, that's cause to say, wait a minute. And even if you've gone to your pediatrician and, oh, he's growing, he's fine, he's happy. Well, why don't we look and find out first? Because if you use a nutrition support strategy, it's going to make your child healthier overall.
Right.
If it doesn't completely resolve the, quote, behavior, you are going to probably see a medication tolerated better. And I often see that as well. And I also want to make that clear. It's not like you need to choose, medicine.
Right.
What can also work really well is a combination. And usually what I see is kids either need a different medicine or a different choice will be made and it will work much better with the nutrition support around it, or they need a lower dose than they've had. So it's not one or the other. But in terms of clinical signs, there's all kinds of things. I mean, I'm often hearing, oh, the GI doctor said my child is just withholding stool. I just don't buy it. Who wants to do that? And of course, if it's been painful to defecate, and you're real little, you're probably your first instinct is to avoid it.
Yeah.
So make it comfortable, and that can improve. And I have seen that happen as well. But gosh, not sleeping well, or let's say, for example, your child can't fall asleep easily, or if you wake up and they've just completely rearranged the bed and they're upside down and inside it. That's a very common sign of weak iron status.
Yeah.
So gosh, there's all kinds of clinical signs. Children are like little canaries in the coal mine. Sometimes, I mean, I certainly look at lab data, but for assessing a child nutritionally, you have to look at clinical signs, symptoms. You have to read a food diary. You have to, because it's not about seeing, well, is mom doing a good job feeding? We're all trying to do a good job. It's not about that. It's about, what does that child's body feel like eating? Is this a picky eater? And what happens when they eat this particular food? That's a diagnostic for me, that food diary. And everyone hates doing them, but I have a form and I make people fill them out.
I do too.
And and it really helps me understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's another one. It's common for kids to struggle to eat during the day. So they won't have enough food during the day, and that alone will affect behavior.
Yeah.
Just having a small calorie deficit, not for you or me, we're different, we're not growing, but for children, just that. I've seen just correcting food intake
Mm-hmm.
alone. One
Yeah.
child in particular was 10, with a PDD NOS, and was doing a lot of wetting at school,
Mm-hmm.
and couldn't write, lots of dysgraphia. And
Mm-hmm.
the very first thing we did was work with the school IEP team to make sure he ate during the day.
Mm-hmm.
Just that.
Yeah.
And he stopped wetting his pants, and
Mm-hmm.
he started writing in much more clearly. He
Mm-hmm.
also began initiating tasks himself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not glamorous.
Right.
It's very, very simple. And nobody wants to think that they're overlooking that, but it's easy to overlook that.
Mm-hmm. It is, and it gets overlooked a ton.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that what you just said a moment ago about kids having different needs because they're growing and we aren't, I find that a lot of times as adults, we look at things like food intake and eating patterns through the lens of ourselves or as adults, and we're done growing. We only grow out from here, right? And
Right.
but we forget that kids, especially at different phases in their growth and development, need a tremendous amount of resources via food and nutrition in order to support their physical growth, their neurological growth, not just how they're functioning, but also the fact that they're growing and what an impact that can have. And I think that food diary is so important because often, you know, parents will say, oh yeah, well, he eats fine. And you look at that and you're going, whoa, you know, we've got way too little or not consistent enough or way too many of the same kinds of things. And what we see in those patterns is that how they're eating and what they're eating is not conducive for a child to be able to optimally grow and develop.
Right. I think we're past parents being afraid of fats. I mean, I've been at this long enough.
Right.
that was the story, you know, a couple decades ago. And now I think finally parents understand their kids need a lot of fat. Right now we're kind of in a carb fear mode.
Mm-hmm.
I meet a lot of parents who want to use diets that deeply restrict carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are essential for kids.
Mm-hmm.
You can use clean, what I like to call clean carbs that
Mm-hmm.
aren't sugary and processed. There's all kinds of ways to do that. But carbohydrate in a child's diet protects protein and fat that they're eating to use it for structure and function. If you're not giving your child enough carbs and they start using their dietary proteins for energy, it's a very wasteful process to extract energy from a protein.
Mm-hmm.
It's harder on your organs. If you are trying to use, say, a ketogenic diet, which has a lot of interesting benefits and of course have been around for almost a century.
Right.
And I have used those in children with seizure disorders.
Mm-hmm.
There is going to be stunting. And I know there are some data questioning that now. I don't see any of it very convincing so far.
Mm-hmm.
Those do have an impact on children that will change things like their growth pattern. It will change how their bones are mineralized. It may create more fractures in children. So, you know, please don't enter these things lightly. Carbohydrates do help children on their weight trajectories. It helps, just like it does, like you said, you and I went nuts there. We just go sideways.
Right.
But it helps the whole growth pattern function as it should. And even when kids are very restricted with what they can eat, there are still ways to work that so that they can grow and feel good and function pretty well.
And
I was going to say, it is essential to put first.
Right. And I think that really goes back to something that you said at the beginning of our conversation about it's great for parents to access information online and elsewhere about nutrition and diets and all of that. But when your kid's really having significant challenges, you really do need to be working with a professional who can guide that process, because I think what you're saying here, and I see this too, is some families with the best of intentions, or maybe having worked with other practitioners who don't understand nutrition as fully, they've tried their kids on a lot of restrictive diets. Mm-hmm. You know, I call it sort of the let's just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, right? Mm-hmm. Let's do a full-on elimination diet for months and months and months at a time, or let's do SCD or GAPS or something like that. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with any of those plans when they are improperly applied. What I see is that we get a host of other issues then, and we get kids who are not getting enough and are not growing well, and ultimately you're not getting the results that you want. So I know that, obviously you're trained in and use a lot of different specialized diets, but what do you recommend for people who are feeling like, wow, I've read about all these diets, maybe one of these is good for my kid. How do you suggest that parents really think about that or approach that? What do you feel like are some maybe things that are worthwhile for parents to try, themselves, as far as shifting to a more, conducive diet versus things that really should have professional level intervention?
Yeah, great question. I think real easy for parents to do is to shift away from processed stuff and try to, if you have time, learn to cook, get in your kitchen, start making some things for your family and your kids that are whole foods. Another important one is get away from glyphosate, get away from GMO foods, get away from pesticides, because there's enough data now, even the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is uber conservative and not cutting edge in any way when it comes to therapeutic nutrition for children in these niches. Even they have published an article saying, we found a lot more of that in kids with ADHD than kids without ADHD. So get off that stuff. And that means committing to organic food, and however you can, whatever of that you can afford, buy it, because it's important. I think what young parents now what they can't know is that when I was a little kid, none of that stuff, very little of that stuff was in the food supply. There were no GMO foods. Yes, we had pesticides, but a lot more of what we ate was more whole.
Yeah.
And we didn't grow up ingesting all this stuff. So 1990 was kind of the dark turn, if you will. So that's when that decade is when GMO foods really exploded, and they were in infant formulas. And then of course, the vaccine schedule changed. One of the vaccines that was given right at birth was genetically modified also, and really changed the playing field for children and what was going on in their immune systems and their gut and the gut immune interface. So you right now can get away from that. That's a choice you can make. As far as discerning what other specific nutrition supports your child needs, it's really hard to know unless someone assesses it for you. So I would almost say that's the most important thing, work on whole foods in your home. And really also important, don't pathologize this. My goal is always toward getting kids to eat as much of, rather than restricting, getting kids to expand what they can comfortably, safely eat. I'm not about avoiding. I mean, yeah, you're going to be avoiding some foods. Pretty much every child in my caseload has had to have a dietary restriction. They can't eat gluten, or they can't eat eggs, or whatever, for a variety of reasons. But at the end of the day, I want parents and families to remember food is joyful. Food is love. Make it that in your home. Make it that. Don't talk about how food is bad for you. Just bring in the good stuff and enjoy that, and leave don't even mention the other stuff. So that's also really important, especially for little kids. They don't need to know the stuff. They need to see you being happy and joyful and bringing good things to the table and enjoying it.
I love that approach and that philosophy about it, because I think especially for parents who have been at this a while or have been doing a lot of dietary interventions, it can become such a chore and such a stressor, and so much about the withholding, just all of that. And I love what you're saying about, wait, let's focus on what we're going to put in. Let's focus on making food a joyful, more relaxed, like this doesn't have to be a medicalized process, even for kids who do have significant medical issues related to that. We can still have a mindset around this and an approach to it that's a lot healthier, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally and relationally too.
Right. Yeah. And, I want to just jump off to this other tangent that we mentioned earlier too, real quick, about
Right.
kids who are so severely affected that
Mhm.
they're hospitalized or whatnot.
Yeah.
Yes, I want to make sure I answer that. Nutrition is not too weak to
Mhm.
redirect that. I have worked with kids who were hospitalized for suicide attempts,
Mhm.
and actually, not that this is necessarily my goal. My goal is to make them happy and feel good, but
Mhm.
they're off medication and different,
Yeah.
completely different. Um, One child, and I think you and I have talked about this guy before, who um, was in so much pain that he broke helmets. He had to wear a helmet to protect his head because he would bang it because he had so
Mhm.
much GI pain. He had
Mhm.
really good care. He had a good GI doctor. He had an incredible effort from his mom,
Mhm.
and a very thorough intervention. Just found a couple little things we could change to correct that gut dysbiosis. And that kid's life changed. He
Mhm.
went from being bedridden to going to school, jumping on his trampoline, getting a little job.
Yeah.
I mean, this is life changing. This really is.
Yeah. And as you said earlier, whether it's using nutritional interventions in isolation or in combination with medication, what I find too is that sometimes kids have been on a lot of medication and maybe there is a small dose of a medication that's beneficial for them, but that's going to work better in
Mhm.
combination with good growth patterns, with the right kind of diet, with the right kind of, targeted nutrients or whatever it is that they may need. When we optimize the nutrition piece of things, the medical interventions, so including medications, can work even better. And I think that's
Right.
important for people to realize.
Right. Yep.
Yeah. Well, this is awesome. We could go on talking for hours because there's so
I
many things
know
to
it.
talk about, but this is really great and gives people, I think, some helpful starting points for thinking about maybe in a new way some of the things that they've noticed with their kids or what might be going on, beneath the surface of their behavior challenges, and what they're dealing with. So I appreciate you sharing that. I want to make sure that people know where they can find you. How can they access more information from you? You've got several books, you've got a website. So what are the best ways for people to find you online or get more info from you?
Yeah, thank you. Probably the quickest, easiest thing to do is go to my website, which is nutritioncare.net. And you can reach me through that. You can even get yourself on my calendar if you want. There's a link right there to put yourself in there if you like. There's links to books, and there's a deep blog there with lots of topics. So that's a great way to find me, nutritioncare.net.
It's an amazing website. I send people there so frequently. You've
Thank
got
you.
so many great blog articles on so many topics. And then your books are also wonderful. And I know your books can be found on Amazon,
Mhm.
as well as an easy way for people to access your books. So lots of great resources that you make available to people. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your expertise today and for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure, Nicole. Anytime.